Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, November the 19th, 2020. Just a reminder, in approximately 19 minutes at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, I will be discussing Mervyn Leroy's 1932 film, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. It was a big story regarding coronavirus, COVID-19, and in particular, the public health response to it. But first, let's look at the Drudge Report for the latest panic update. CDC pleads with Americans to not travel for Thanksgiving. There's a picture of Rudy Giuliani at his press conference with hair dye leaking down his cheeks. And that is titled Giuliani. I'll be talking about Rudy Giuliani shortly. Pandemic worse than ever. Testing strained. California curfew. LA nears lockdown. New York City on brink. Death in Europe every 17 seconds. Supermarkets most common place to catch COVID. Oh, so we can close them down now too? Maybe we can have the military deliver food and drink to us. Restaurant requires $50 test before dining. Military reports record cases. Major outbreak hits crew of Navy ship. So let's go into this really quite important story, which was effectively buried in the mainstream media. The longest report that you can find on it, and one of the few places where you can find this story, is from the Western Standard website at westernstandardonline.com. The Western Standard was a magazine founded by Ezra Levant around 2005. It went out of business about 3 years later, and I don't know, a few months ago the website was revived. But this story is by Dave Naylor from 2 days ago. Senior doc says Alberta politicians playing medicine, media driving hysteria. A top Edmonton doctor in virology says Albertans are being led down the garden path by government health officials in their efforts to stop the COVID-19 virus. Dr. Roger Hodkinson said the virus is no worse than a, quote, bad flu, unquote. Hodkinson is the CEO of Western Medical Assessments and has been the company's medical director for over 20 years. He received his general medical degrees from Cambridge University, then became a Royal College certified pathologist in Canada, FRCPC, following a residency in Vancouver. He also taught at the University of Alberta and runs Mutant DX, a molecular diagnostics company in North Carolina. The video is available on YouTube. If YouTube bins it, which is quite possible, it's been put up on BitChute as well. Quote, "What I'm going to say is lay language and blunt. There is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. There is absolutely nothing to be done to contain this virus other than protecting your more vulnerable people. It should be thought of as nothing more than a bad flu season. This is not Ebola. It's not SARS. It's politics playing medicine, and that's a very dangerous game. Masks are utterly useless. There is no evidence based on their effectiveness whatsoever. Seeing these people walking around like lemmings, obeying without any knowledge, putting the masks on." Hodkinson said social distancing is also useless because the virus can travel up to 30 meters before landing. That's approximately 100 feet. He said positive tests, which do not accurately reflect whether you have the virus, are driving public hysteria, adding testing should stop unless you show up at a hospital with respiratory problems. He called for residents of long-term care homes to be given daily doses of vitamin D, which can help battle the virus. Hodkinson said the risk from death from COVID-19 to Albertans under 65 is 1 in 300,000. He also blamed businesses' closures for a spate of suicides and other social problems. Quote, "It's just another bad flu, and you have to get your minds around that. You're being led down the garden path by the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, in this province. I am absolutely outraged that it has reached this level." Alberta has had close to 41,000 cases of COVID-19, resulting in 427 deaths. I should point out that Alberta is a province of 4.4 million people. So given the eminence of this physician, one would have thought that this would be a big story in Canada. Well, as mentioned previously, it was not. I went looking for Roger Hodkinson on DuckDuckGo and on Google, and I found one reference in the mainstream media from a CBC news story of November the 13th. Doesn't speak against Edmonton's mask bylaw at City Hall meeting. This story begins, city councillors got a steady stream of criticism at a Community and Public Services Committee Friday about the city's move to extend its face covering bylaw. City administration is asking council to extend the bylaw until May, as the current one expires December the 31st. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16th paragraph. Pathologist Dr. Roger Hodkinson, CEO of Western Medical Assessments, a company that conducts medical examinations for lawyers and insurance adjusters, called the mask bylaw in reaction to the pandemic simply outrageous. Again, this is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. There was nothing in the Edmonton Journal, nothing in the Calgary Herald. It was as if this doctor's statement just vanished after he had made it. But after the Western Standard website story was published, this story began to be disseminated, and it appears in a story by Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Noting that he was also an expert in virology, Hodkinson pointed out that his role as CEO of a biotech company that manufactures COVID tests means, quote, "I might know a little bit about this." Yes, mandatory mask mandates, completely pointless. Quote, "Paper masks and fabric masks are simply virtue signaling. They're not even worn effectively most of the time. It's utterly ridiculous. Seeing these unfortunate, uneducated people," I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense, "seeing these people walking around like lemmings, obeying without any knowledge base to put the mask on their face. I'm absolutely outraged that it has reached this level. It should all stop tomorrow." Hodkinson's credentials are beyond a question. He received his general medical degrees from Cambridge University, MA, MB, B. Cheer, where he was a scholar at Corpus Christi College. Following a residency at the University of British Columbia, he became a Royal College certified general pathologist and is also a fellow of the College of American Pathologists. We hear so very much about the science. Science is supposed to be about skepticism. It's supposed to be about hypotheses, which then become theories, which hypotheses can be tested. They can become theories. If you look at the history of science, various theories tend to be replaced by other theories. But we have a new kind of science now, scientism, as Thomas Zaz told it, where a group of scientists say one thing, and apparently it is chiseled in stone forever. I could mention some famous examples of them getting the wrong end of the stick. For instance, you could read about Semmelweis, who discovered the solution to so many babies and their mothers dying in childbirth, which was to get people attending upon the birth to wash their hands. since he did not have a theory. To bolster this, he was pretty much laughed out of his career. He was destroyed. He was fired from the Vienna hospital where he worked, and nurses went back to not washing their hands. This was before the germ theory of disease became generally accepted. Let's look at deficiency diseases, scurvy, rickets, etc. Well, as far as scurvy goes, Captain James Cook and others had discovered the way to prevent scurvy was through citrus fruits, fresh meat, but there was no theory, again, to back this, and this was laughed off by the scientists until the synthesis of vitamins in the early 20th century. Let us go to the chat. William Hicks says, good evening, Mr. Hicks. Walrus Libertarian, life is canceled. Anran says, Rudy G was brilliant today. I noticed that about the 21-minute mark of the press conference, he took off his glasses to wipe his face, and the photo clickers went crazy. Media scum. YT says, Sidney Powell is incredible. So refreshing to see someone who is genuinely pissed off and who means what she says. Chokukin 666, they closed the schools again in New York City. I will be talking about that in a little while. Did anyone happen to see the press conference that Andrew Cuomo, beloved Gov, dishing it 24/7, gave yesterday? He begins by insulting the reporters in the room, saying not to be obnoxious. And the question is, are schools closed or not? And he said, well, this was all made clear a week ago. And basically, he called everyone in the room stupid and ignorant. And one of the reporters says, yes, but the parents are unsure about whether these schools are closed or not. And Cuomo, rather than clarify the situation, simply continued to heap abuse on everyone in the room. And I was thinking, so Donald Trump is supposed to be the obnoxious one, is he? He's like Mr. Rogers compared to Cuomo. Watching this clip, I was waiting for when Cuomo was going to tell one of the reporters to get your effing shine box. What a nasty man he is. Okay, Yo Mama says, KMG, I've been thinking on what you said the other day about a person's favorite music from being from ages 15 to 25. In my case, it's more like 8 to 18. Music generally sucked when I was in college. I picked the years 15 to 25 because, well, they're years after puberty. It's the case with a lot of people that they're songs that they liked before they were adolescents, and then they hear them again as adults and they cringe, and then they often pretend that they never liked that song. Yes, people have the strongest attachments to things that happened during their most formative years, and for most people, the years between 15 and 25 are the most formative years of their lives. This is when the most important things happen to them for the first time, when they make the decisions which are going to guide their life. Fredo, yes. YT, I bet his daughters and sons-in-law hate his guts. You remember, what was it, a month ago? He was whining that apparently he couldn't get a date. I was thinking about that today, and I thought, I don't know, maybe women have a natural revulsion against murderers. Hello, Professor Paul Privet. He says, I know I've heard of a privet hedge. Okay. FBI Cyber Division says, my formative years were in the womb and when I started walking. Oh, we're going to play that game. Are we? Okay, masks. Let's talk about masks. I had mentioned a Danish study, which for some reason was having a great deal of difficulty getting published. Now, why might that be? This is from the Daily Mail. Masks don't stop you getting COVID. Top experts criticize troubling lack of evidence to justify wearing them after major Danish study concluded they don't protect the wearer. Top scientists have warned there's a troubling lack of evidence that face masks prevent COVID-19 infection after a major study in Denmark found that they don't protect people who wear them. Governments around the world, including the UK, have made it mandatory to wear a face covering in indoor public spaces, despite a dearth of rigorous trials into their effectiveness. The rationale has been that masks must be better than nothing because they block at least some virus being exhaled or inhaled by the wearer. But a randomized study published by scientists at Copenhagen University, thought to be the best of its kind so far, found no statistical evidence that they offer any protection whatsoever. Reacting to the finding in a column in The Spectator today, Oxford University's Professor Carl Hennigan and Dr. Tom Jefferson said there has been a troubling lack of robust evidence on face masks and COVID-19. There have been only 3 real-life studies comparing mask wearers to non-mask wearers, one in Guinea-Bissau, one in India, and the new Denmark study. All have shown masks to have no benefit in preventing the disease. But the experts added, quote, "Now we have properly rigorous scientific research we can rely on. The evidence shows wearing masks in the community does not significantly reduce the rates of infection." The Copenhagen experts recruited 6,000 volunteers in the spring before masks were mandatory there and split them into 2 groups, with half wearing masks in public and half not. After a month, the mask-wearing volunteers were tested for current and previous COVID-19 infection and compared with the control group who didn't wear them. Results show that after 1 month, 1.8% of the people wearing masks had been infected with the virus. By comparison, 2.1% of the people in the unmasked group had tested positive for COVID-19. The difference between the 2 groups was not found to be statistically significant. Quote, "The study does not confirm the expected halving of the risk of infection for people wearing face masks. The results could indicate a more moderate degree of protection of 15 to 20%. However, the study could not rule out that face masks do not provide any protection." The team from Copenhagen University Hospital said the findings should not be used to argue against their widespread use, however, because masks may prevent people infecting others. 9 other trials looking at the efficacy of masks on influenza have found that masks make little or no difference in whether people catch the virus. Professor Hennigan and Dr. Jefferson added the low number of studies into the effect different interventions have on the spread of COVID-19, a subject of global importance, suggests there is a total lack of interest from governments in pursuing evidence-based medicine, unquote. They said the only trials which have shown masks to be effective in stopping airborne diseases have been observation studies, which are considered a much less accurate form of research. One other thing. Hang on just a second. I will be back in 5 seconds. Now, the efficacy of mask wearing versus non-mask wearing in this study, this Danish study, is clearly statistically insignificant, but there's another question. What are the hazards associated with wearing masks? And it could well be when the hazards of wearing masks, and I'll mention several, heightened anxiety levels, trouble breathing, particularly people with respiratory illnesses, and also threat of infection from masks being worn repeatedly. If these were incorporated into a study, it would seem likely that mask wearing it's not even a draw there, that in toto mask wearing is worse for people than not wearing masks. But we see, Dr. Thomas Frieden, former director of the CDC, there is absolutely no doubt that masks work as source control. The question this study was designed to ask is, do they work as personal protection? An N95 mask is better than a surgical mask. A surgical mask is better than most cloth masks. A cloth mask is better than nothing. Yes. I can't remember who made this observation, but used masks are what they call a biohazard. Have you heard of any centralized collection of these used masks? No, you find them discarded everywhere. A relative of mine who's spent some time in the hospital recently said in the hospital, they were strewn all over the place, all over the floor, in elevators, etc., etc., etc. But the medical community, they have lashed themselves to the mast of the masks. And it is, as I've noted before, and this is a universal principle, it is very difficult, very rare, to get people to admit they were wrong about something important, particularly when they are professionally bound up in it. Philip Lemoyne writes, I hadn't actually read the Nature paper that allegedly showed that lockdowns have saved more than 3 million lives in Europe last year, but now that I have, I'm utterly shocked this worthless piece of garbage was published. Also, something that didn't make sense about the results, and the only explanation I could think of, implied that the conclusion people drew from that study was totally unwarranted, but it was impossible to tell from the description of the results whether my hypothesis was correct. So I downloaded the code and ran the analysis myself so I could take a closer look at the results, and surprise, it confirmed that my hypothesis was right, which presumably is why they neglected to describe this particular result in the paper or the supplementary materials. I'm truly shocked that no reviewer even thought to check that. I will be writing something about the paper because it's absolutely outrageous. People sometimes ask why I joke that I'm anti-science, but this is why. This stuff is propaganda disguised as science with scary math. And at the top, someone had responded to him, so you did better science in an afternoon using the interwebs than actual scientists publishing in the most prominent, respected, trusted scientific journal in the world. And he responded, yes. Let's talk about Australia, which was, of course, founded as a prison colony and now appears to be reverting back to that role. Someone called Andrea in Australia, at In Touch for Now, tweeted, hey, at SA Police News, that is the South Australian police, for the sake of my stupid husband, who's doing a Karen from Brighton moan, can you please broadcast very specific information about walking the dog, #lockdown. The South Australia Police responded, hi, Andrea, you cannot leave the house to walk the dog or to exercise. Yeah, how about that? And so it would appear that in 2020, the South Australia Police changed its motto from keeping South Australia safe to we control every aspect of your daily lives. And yes, other people noted the motto of the South Australia Police, keeping South Australia safe. And this is one of those stories which was popular even before the internet, the kind of thing that people used to buy USA Today. People in talk radio used to buy USA Today in order to get these humorous little stories. And only in 2020, these humorous little stories aren't humorous anymore. Oh, yes, we've established police states all over the Western world, but what are you gonna do? It'll all be over soon. What? It's not going to be over? What, they're talking about the third quarter of 2021 or maybe into 2022 or maybe forever? From Big League Politics, Evan James. The police department was responding to a resident who was ostensibly trying to keep her husband from walking the dog because it's against the law, all due to a virus with a 99.9% or greater survival rate. For context, the state of South Australia recently issued a 6-day mandatory lockdown Australia itself has made headlines over the past several months because of its exceptionally harsh lockdown measures and heavy enforcement. Stephen Marshall MP had tweeted, South Australians will pause and create a 6-day circuit breaker that will enable us to get ahead of the Parafield cluster. Ooh, there's a good movie title, The Parafield Cluster. This means all non-essential workers must stay home and only leave for groceries and medical supplies. We're doing this to keep South Australia safe and strong. Like this circuit breaker. Oh, I see. I know that Pierre Trudeau and others have used the metaphor of flipping a switch, rather like a circuit breaker. That, yes, the electricity has gone out into your house and maybe you've blown a fuse or maybe the circuit breaker has tripped. So you go down to the basement, and you open the panel and you flip the switch and hey presto, the electricity comes back on. No, but we've been told that no, but it's not like flipping a switch except when it is. Yes, South Australia circuit breaker. This is official government documents. People will only be able to leave the house for the following reasons: to work as an emergency services worker or to work providing essential services, for agricultural work, to receive medical care, including seeking COVID-19 testing, to obtain medical supplies, one person from the household once a day to attend supermarkets to obtain essential supplies, organized end-of-life visits, and in emergency situation, masks should be worn outside of the house at all times. Note, you cannot leave your house to exercise. What's closed? The following businesses will close: takeaway food services, shops, excluding essential food services, universities and tertiary education facilities, pubs, restaurants, cafe, food courts, elective surgery, except cancer, open inspections and auctions, fly-in, fly-out workers, aged care and disability facilities will go into lockdown. Construction industry will be closed. Holiday homes and other holiday accommodation and no further bookings. Weddings and funerals canceled and banned. Outdoor sport, fitness, exercise not permitted. Regional travel not permitted. How long will this have to go on before people start asking the questions about the purpose of life? If life is going to consist of being alone in your house and shaking in fear, is that a life worth living? Let's see. Big League Politics says this is without question unjust. Unjust laws like these don't really possess the character of law, but are in fact best described as lawlessness. Leaders who gin up such fantastically outrageous lockdown rules, as well as the police officers who enforce them and the citizens who tattle on their neighbors, deserve our withering contempt and unending ridicule. Well, if this goes on for much longer, particularly if Christmas is banned, as it appears it will be, these people might be facing stronger resistance than that. So why was this necessary? Well, at Summit News, Paul Joseph Watson explains the state of South Australia has detected 36 cases since infections were found in Adelaide on Sunday. The first community cases detected in 6 months, reports BBC News. Ooh, 36 cases. And again, going back to what I was saying in March, I made a prediction, and it's come true, much to my horror, that the authorities are going to wreck everything, and then they're going to pat themselves on the back and say, we did such a good job. Because if we hadn't wrecked everything, then things would have been wrecked even more. No, we'd all be dead. Again, for a disease, the average age of death is, well, at least in my country, 82 years of age. 82 years of age, which is pretty much how long people live without COVID. But no, it doesn't make any difference, because I guess What? Adrenaline, David Mamet. Adrenaline is the most powerful drug there is. That's what Val Kilmer says in Spartan. Maybe David Mamet was wrong. Maybe panic is the most powerful drug there is. Here's another one of those amusing stories. This is from Hannah Blow at Breitbart. Doctors have attributed a Croatian man's death to the Wuhan coronavirus, even though he died falling off a ladder, according to the Journal of Forensic Pathology. The 51-year-old man died in what appeared to be a workplace incident, falling off a 10-foot ladder while working on a home this year. The man suffered minor external injuries as well as a subarachnoid hemorrhage, described as bleeding within the subarachnoid space, which is the area between the brain and the tissues that cover the brain, an often fatal condition. However, the autopsy also discovered visceral congestion, particularly in his lungs. Per the New York Post, during the autopsy, doctors found that large swaths of the man's lungs were blocked. The finding then led scientists to conclude that he suffered from acute respiratory distress syndrome, a life-threatening condition that can be caused by COVID-19. Okay. All COVID, all the time. So New York schools are closed again, despite the, I was watching this press conference and he was talking about green zones and red zones. This is Ben Domenech in The Federalist. He slammed New York Governor Andrew Cuomo Thursday for shutting down the state schools and blaming New Yorkers for another round of self-imposed lockdowns. Blaming New Yorkers, because apparently you haven't been fighting this virus hard enough, because it is very sneaky. It's a malicious virus. And you let your guard down by acting, as people normally do. Perhaps with the knowledge that if you're under 70, the chances of you dying from COVID-19 are, practically they don't exist. The survival rate is 99.95%. Domenech said self-imposed when Andrew Cuomo made the decision to put people in nursing homes. That wasn't self-imposed. It was the government. The responsibility really is his. People are looking to our political leaders in this moment for responsible leadership, not bluster, not hiding from the actual consequences of their decisions. You look over across the Atlantic and you see in France and Germany, they're experiencing significant spikes right now. They are locking down a lot of things. You know what they aren't locking down and closing? Schools. He noted that research suggests schools are not a source of major spread of the virus. But everyone has to suffer. That's a very modern opinion. It's, I suppose it's kind of the converse that unless everyone has justice, no one can have justice. Unless everyone is happy, no one can be happy. What's the point of people suffering, of some people suffering, if everyone is not made to suffer? This is a democracy, right? Let's go back to the chat and see what's going on there. Okay, let's scroll up here. Okay, we talked about music already. Okay, here we go. FBI Cyber Division says the virus only affects people in close proximity if they are Trump supporters at a rally, not for lefties at a Black Lives Matter riot. Well, medical officials in the United States have responded to that, saying that it is outrageous and probably racist to make this distinction because the BLM protests are themselves a public health measure. Yes, they've actually said this. Adam says, does anyone else get the feeling that we are entering a more heroic age? People are finally talking seriously about the need for courage again? Well, it could be the case, I suppose, which would be a very good thing. Oh, that's better, isn't it? Okay. Yes, we have lived in an unheroic age since when? Since what, 1918, say? That might be where to start. Evelyn Waugh certainly thought that heroism had died in 1918. Coachalango says we need rankings of largest COVID anti-lockdown protests. Palcazo88 says it's fitting that a nickname for Australia is Oz, like the HBO prison show. I didn't really watch very much of that at all because from the parts that I saw, it seemed to be an outright celebration of homosexual rape. Let's see. Jonathan Pohl says deported kulaks under special settlement restrictions had greater freedom of movement than people in South Australia. They could go up to 3 kilometers from their residence. But we know more than they did a century ago, right? Because we just keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter and more knowledgeable as well. Throughout my lifetime, when I was in school, my generation was referred to as the best educated generation in history, and I thought, I don't believe that, because not that long ago they were teaching Latin and Greek, and they stopped teaching that. And so the next generation was referred to as the best educated generation in history. And I thought my generation wasn't particularly well educated, but it was better educated than that generation. And then 2 generations from mine, up to the present day, the best educated generation in history, when they're taught almost nothing, when most of the time spent in school now, certainly in grade school, is spent dicking around. It's not spent learning anything. Just another sec here. I'll be right back. Okay. Yeah, all right. I changed the setup from yesterday. And because the monitor was too far away, I might get 2 of these ring lights, one for each side. Is that better? I think it is. That's better. Much better. Okay. Leponius Maximus Meridius says Kevin's wardrobe continues to impress. Best dressed man on YouTube. Well, thank you. Too kind. Rustin Shackelford says maybe it's COVID related because his coughing forced him to fall off the ladder. Coachalango said, I remember when KMG wore a Bill Belichick style gray hoodie. Yeah. Was that when I was? Yeah. I don't know. I suppose I dressed rather slovenly before I started. Actually, I guess I decided to dress up in the last few months when I was on Luke Ford's live stream. Let the Hunger Games begin, says a tricky woo. Again, and from the same source, elites are watering at the thoughts of us offing each other for scraps. Well, I'm going to be talking about the Great Reset again a little later on. Chocokin666 says, zero tolerance dialectical materialist health policy. Paul Casso88 says, KMG, who's the greatest Canadian MP? I'd have to put some thought into that. I couldn't say off the top of my head. Not Trudeau. In terms of the greatest when you speak of greatness in terms of, say, transmutation, clearly Lester Pearson and Pierre Trudeau were the greatest Canadian prime ministers because when they were done with the country, Pearson became prime minister in 1963 and Trudeau left office in 1984. Canada had been completely transformed. In effect, it had been turned upside down. That everything that was once thought Canadian was now thought to be anti-Canadian, and everything that was once thought anti-Canadian was and is considered to be Canadian. Dennis Dale says the mic's unattended. Oh, yeah. Let's see. Can I get it out of shot? No, it's stuck in the shot. Didn't used to be, but I don't want to go through all that again. Greetings from Seattle, Dennis, his visionary companion. Dennis Dale is in the house, says Leponius Maximus Meridius. Trump is winning. I'm going to get to that real soon now. But let's wrap up the most important and yet the most boring story of 2020. It's just relentless. It's like, being beaten over the head with a mallet. It's like, are you going to panic yet? Are you going to panic yet? Are you going to panic yet? Why aren't you panicking? Come on, panic. Everyone else is panicking. It's 45 degrees out and pouring rain, and the wind is gusting to 40, 50 miles an hour. It was here, a couple of blocks away, 2 days ago, and I saw all these people wearing masks. And that's how easy it was. That's how easy it was. Oh, there are great traditions of liberty to defend. Yeah, and who is there defending liberty? Practically no one. From the Daily Mail, Sage was put on a pedestal, but their models clearly didn't reflect reality. Tory MP slams scientific advisors as damning documentary reveals they relied on Wikipedia data and wrongly predicted virus would peak in June. Sage admitted early virus modeling based on figures from online encyclopedia. Committee of scientists advising the prime minister also had no expert on human coronavirus. Dubious data formed the basis for the group's calls for first national lockdown. Experts predicted that the peak would be in June, but it actually came in April. Impact of care home staff spreading COVID by working in multiple sites, not considered. And this is from a BBC documentary that's airing tonight called Lockdown 1.0, Following the Science. Maybe we're finally getting a backlash of real science against a fake science. And not a moment too soon, well, perhaps quite a few months too late. I've said it before, but I'll say it again with regard to the United Kingdom and Professor Neil Ferguson of Imperial College. Nobody seemed to have asked the question, what do we know about this guy? He's been around a long time. Has he made predictions before? What were his predictions? Oh, shit, really? He was catastrophically wrong about everything? So we're supposed to believe that guy now? No. We're not going to do that. But that's exactly what happened. And I wonder if no one involved with the British government sought to look into Professor Ferguson's bona fides, or whether they did and discovered the awful truth and just decided to ignore that. Well, he's been wrong every other time, but he could be right this time. Besides, we have to be seen to be doing something. And, doing nothing, saying that, well, this is a virus and it will play out like other viruses. Oh, so you're condemning old people to death. What? Who's condemning old people to death? In fact, the public health policies decided by Andrew Cuomo did, in fact, condemn thousands of New Yorkers to death. But that's not something the media wants to talk about because he is the love gov, dishing it 24/7. And once again, CNN is considered a serious news source, isn't it? How could you have the governor's brother interview him on a regular basis with all this yucking it up? Mom always loved you best. Oh, let's talk about recipes. And how could a serious news channel allow that to happen? From Lockdown Skeptics, Sebastian Friebel, a former parliamentary advisor to the German Bundestag, has written a magisterial account of the supranational undemocratic forces using the public health crisis as a pivot for far-reaching change and the often sinister secrecy being used to achieve it. Most of the convergent opportunism we have been highlighting on Lockdown Skeptics. Here's the opening to whet your appetite. Dear fellow citizens, I am addressing you as a nonpartisan forum employee of the German Bundestag with the function of a parliamentary advisor. As a result of my work in Parliament and in a parliamentary group, I have become aware that the people in our country are being deliberately deprived of information on the coronavirus, which is of crucial importance for assessing the situation. In view of the enormous significance of recent events, I consider it my duty to my fellow citizens to raise these issues publicly. So as to be able to express myself as freely as possible on these issues, I have resigned from my position in the Bundestag. Some of what I report in the following will be considered by many readers as impossible and will be firmly rejected. I would like to say to these people that in publishing this report, I am taking on considerable personal risk, and I will not dare to take this step if I are unsure of my statements. I do not want to say much about myself at this point. You, dear reader, only need to know the following about me. I'm writing this report in sincere concern for the security, freedom, and prosperity of us all. These fundamental pillars of our democracy are acutely endangered because the corona crisis is being instrumentalized and our legitimate concerns about the virus being exploited for third-party objectives. Why is lockdown always the answer? Ross Clark in The Telegraph bemoans the catch-22 we now live in, where every piece of evidence is taken as justification for tightening the screws. The government's fetish for incarcerating its own citizens is growing stronger by the day. Britain has become a giant Guantanamo Bay of COVID control, maintained by invisible fences of call centers and fines. Worse, the creeping nature of it has meant that we never get any proper debate as to what price we really want to pay to suppress the virus. We are fed daily with graphs and charts showing the numbers of new infections, hospitalizations, and deaths, but we never get to the other side of the ledger, not from the government or its scientists anyway. The impact on our mental health, on other medical conditions, and deaths caused by seriously ill people failing to seek timely medical attention, or the price we are going through to pay for the deprivation caused by economic decline. Whatever happens, it seems to mean more lockdown, like the poor wretches dragged off to medieval ducking stools, who were judged innocent if they drowned, found guilty of witchcraft, and burned alive if they survived the ducking. We can't win. If COVID numbers fall, it is taken as a sign that lockdown is working and therefore must be prolonged. If COVID numbers rise, it is taken as a sign we must have even tougher lockdown. Never mind that COVID numbers were already leveling off before the second lockdown was called, very sharply so, in Tier 3 areas such as Liverpool and Nottingham. And finally, on this subject, from Alex Berenson, there are two teams, Team Reality and Team Apocalypse. One wants open schools, unrestricted travel, and the freedom to uncover your face in public. The other wants panic and rules for every part of life, down to how you eat Thanksgiving dinner. Two teams. Which are you on? And he also tweets, and California Governor Newsom just announced nightly curfews, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. through December 21st. The French Laundry and mostly peaceful terrorists are accepted. California has 40 million people. 5,300 are hospitalized with COVID, down from almost 9,000 in July. Let's see. Elon James White wears a mask had tweeted, Team effing apocalypse, what the F is wrong with you? Nobody is telling you how to eat Thanksgiving. They're asking you to help save lives. Reality is what we're living in, and it's a pandemic that's killed 250,000, you dipshit. Oh dear. Alex Berenson responds, fact check, false. Wear a mask between bites definitely falls in the category of how to eat, as well as the category of insufferably arrogant and counterproductive advice. A Team Apocalypse specialty. And he provides proof of this. This is from COVID19.gov.ca. COVID19ca.gov. Don't forget to keep your mask on in between bites. The tweet added a diagram to help show the proper technique of eating food while wearing a mask. The image does warn people to limit the amount of time you remove your mask while eating. If anyone had predicted this a year ago, he would have been considered a candidate for the funny farm. Let's move on to the disputed American presidential election. It's not just the presidential election that's disputed, of course. John James, who is a black Republican in Michigan, who had a very healthy lead throughout most of the night, suddenly counting stopped, just as the counting for president stopped. And when the counting began again, where did all these votes come from? So it's not just the presidential race that is disputed. This is from Joel Pollack at Breitbart. 9 key points from Trump campaign press conference on challenges to election results. Rudy Giuliani and other lawyers representing Trump's campaign outlined their case Thursday that the November 3rd presidential election was so deeply flawed in several key states that the results should be overturned in the president's favor. Giuliani said there was a pattern to the alleged irregularities in key states that suggested, he said, a, quote, plan from a centralized place, unquote, to commit voter fraud in cities controlled by Democrats. Just to give you an example of that, a particularly shocking example, this is from Econ Chick Intel Chick. Wow, even I didn't realize this. Rudy and his team's massive legal research proves that all Republican poll watchers across swing states were corralled at exactly the same time in each state. That's statistically impossible, had to be centrally directed. Here are the 9 key points from Rudy Giuliani. Observers were allegedly prevented from watching mail-in ballots being opened. 2, allegedly unequal application of the law in Democratic counties. In Pennsylvania, whose state Supreme Court created new relaxed voting rules before the election, Giuliani alleged that absentee voters in Democratic counties were allowed to cure defects in their ballots, while voters in Republican counties, which obeyed the state law as written, were not. This is cure defects in your ballot. Golly. Can you imagine? Can you imagine, in the old days, the old, I don't know, troglodyte days when people used paper ballots, that you fill out your paper ballot, you fold it, you drop it in the box, and then you come back a couple of hours later and say, I think I made a mistake on my ballot. I'd like the opportunity to cure this ballot. What do you think the reaction would have been? Number 3, voters allegedly arrived at the polls to discover other people had voted for them. He alleged that Democrats had filled out absentee ballots for other people, hoping they would not show up. Number 4, election officials were allegedly told not to look for defects in ballots and to backdate ballots. Giuliani cited an affidavit from an official who swore she was told not to exclude absentee ballots for defects and to backdate ballots so that they would not appear to have been received after Election Day. 5, ballots casting votes for Joe Biden and no other candidates were allegedly run several times through machines. Giuliani said that there were 60 witnesses in Michigan who would attest to ballots being produced quickly and counted twice or thrice. He said a minimum of 60,000 and a maximum of 100,000 ballots were allegedly affected. 6, absentee ballots were accepted in Wisconsin without being applied for, which is against the law in Wisconsin. 7, there were allegedly overvotes, with some precincts allegedly recording more voters than residents, among other problems. This is particularly a difficulty in Michigan and Wisconsin, and in particular Wayne County in Michigan. 8, voting machines and software are allegedly owned by companies with ties to the Venezuelan regime and to left-wing donor George Soros. Sidney Powell argued that U.S. votes were being counted overseas and that Dominion voting machines and Smartmatic software were controlled by foreign interests, manipulating algorithms to change the results. Powell noted specifically that Smartmatic's owners included 2 Venezuelan nationals whom she alleged had ties to the regime of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. The legal team alleged that there were statistical anomalies, such as huge batches of votes for Biden, that could not be explained except as manipulation, which they alleged happened in the wee hours of the morning as vote counting had stalled. 2016, foreign intervention in the presidential election, specifically Russian intervention. So the company, which has the voting machines in 30 out of 50 American states, is a foreign-owned company. Does that not constitute foreign interference in an American presidential election? And 9, the Constitution provides a process for electing a president if the vote is corrupted. Jenna Ellis argued that the media had usurped the power to declare the winner of the election. She made the point, citing Federalist number 68, that the constitutional process of selecting a president had procedural safeguards against corruption and foreign influence. Giuliani presented evidence in the form of sworn affidavits, citing two and noting that the campaign had many more from private individuals. He noted that several lawsuits that had been dismissed had been filed by private individuals, not the campaign directly. He said lawsuits might be filed in Arizona and that the campaign was also examining irregularities in New Mexico and Virginia. So what does Fox News have to say about this? Pam Key at Breitbart reports, Fox News White House correspondent Kristen Fisher reacted to the Giuliani press conference by saying, well, that was certainly a colorful news conference, but it was light on facts. So much of what he said was simply not true or has already been thrown out in court. He opened by making this really bold and baseless claim that a lot of this alleged inside voter fraud he is referring to came from one centralized place. He called it a nationwide conspiracy, and yet he failed to provide any hard evidence to back up that one specific claim, especially when it cuts to the core of the democratic process. Does this woman know anything about the law? It is simply a commonplace for lawsuits to be dismissed all the time and then to be refiled. Often they're dismissed because the court says this is the wrong jurisdiction. The court does not have jurisdiction. Certain procedural requirements were not met by this lawsuit that was filed. And in many, many cases, the lawsuits are refiled and the litigants win their case. Yeah, this is very interesting. Jonathan Turley tweets, Giuliani admitted that they are having trouble getting lawyers because of the threats made against counsel. On this point, there is a reasonable basis for objection. The campaign against Republican lawyers by groups like the Lincoln Project is outrageous. Yes, it's a conspiracy in itself, and perhaps RICO law could be used against the Lincoln Project. Again, Anglo-American law says that every man is entitled to a defense. Now, what the Lincoln Project and, well, the media as a whole and the Democratic Party are saying is that these lawyers are beyond the pale, the ones supposedly disrupting the election. However, lawyers working for serial killers, mafiosi, those people accused of sexual trafficking, oh, that's perfectly respectable work. But working for the President of the United States, no. We are going to ruin you financially and socially. Gives you an idea of their values. Now, there's a German angle to this story. And I wonder if this is going to play out because it is certainly intriguing enough. It's from the Gateway Pundit. Huge. Attorney Sidney Powell confirms alleged Dominion servers in Germany were confiscated. Last week, Representative Louis Gohmert told Chris Salcedo on Newsmax that people on the ground in Germany report that Cittel, which hosted elections data improperly through Spain, was raided by a large U.S. Army force and their servers were seized in Frankfurt. We posted more information we received from our source on this raid in Germany. The U.S. government, once they determined that this Dominion server was involved in switching votes, then the intelligence community began a search for the server and discovered that it was in Germany. In order to get access to that server and have it available for use in a legal manner, they had to have the State Department work in tandem with the Department of Justice. They had to request that the government of Germany cooperate in allowing the seizure of this server. The appropriate documents required to effect that kind of seizure were put in place, signed off on, and it appears that there was also U.S. military support in the operation. The U.S. military was not in the lead, but this helps explain why Esper, the former Secretary of Defense, was fired, and Miller and Kash Patel were put in place so that the military would not interfere with the operation in any way. By getting a hold of the server, they are now going to have the direct evidence of when they were instructed to stop counting. They will also discover who gave the direction to stop counting and who initiated the algorithm that started switching votes. The CIA was completely excluded from this operation. At the press conference, Emerald Robinson of Newsmax asked, there were reports that a piece of hardware, possibly a server, was picked up in Germany. Is that true, and is it related to this? Sidney Powell responded, that is true. It is somehow related to this, but I do not know if the good guys got it or bad guys got it. This is from Rebel News. I suppose this is the first time I've ever cited a Rebel News story. One of the lawyers working on Trump's election fraud case seemingly referred to a Rebel News report on Dominion voting systems sharing an office with a company linked to billionaire global financier George Soros's Open Society Foundations. Until recently, the Toronto-based headquarters of Dominion was sharing an office with Make Way Canada, a subsidiary of the Soros-connected Tides Foundation. Today, during a press conference held by Trump's lawyers, former assistant United States attorney and one-time president of the American Academy of Appellate Lawyers, Sidney Powell, made mention of the strange coincidence that a supposedly nonpartisan electronic voting company would be sharing an office with a far-left leaning organization like Make Way Tides Foundations. Dominion executives are nowhere to be found now, Powell said. They are moving their offices overnight to different places. Their office in Toronto was shared with one of the Soros entities. One of the leaders of the Dominion project overall is Lord Malloch Brown, Soros's number 2 person in the UK. Dominion Voting Systems is majority owned by investment firm Staple Street Capital, a company that no longer lists, who sits on its board of directors on its website. Canadian businessman John Paulus also owns a significant share of Dominion. Dominion is linked to both the Federal Liberal Party and Conservative Party of Canada, who use the company for their leadership selection process. That should have been sufficient for Dominion to be never used again after the fiasco of the voting process that led to Andrew Scheer becoming leader of the Conservative Party. Okay. Oh, the Michigan Secretary of State Benson. You'll recall that 2 members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, they decided not to accept the voting results from Wayne County, whereupon some Yemeni fellow started issuing threats against them, or one of them, the woman, and her children. And there was all sorts of unpleasantness, and they said, okay, it's okay now. We're voting for it. Now, apparently, they have thought better, and they have rescinded their rescind. But Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, a Democrat, said Thursday's broadcast of MSNBC's Live that there was no legal avenue for 2 members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers to reserve their votes. Oh, okay. So, in a presidential election in one of the most populous counties in the United States, terrorist threats issued against those people responsible for certifying election results made them change their mind. And now the Secretary of State of Michigan was saying, yeah, okay, they had their chance and they blew it. You know, no takebacks. Yeah, okay. She said, this doesn't mean, again, this has been par for the course, you won't see a PR strategy to try to sow seeds of doubt and create confusion about the process. But the law is actually quite clear on this. Every county in Michigan has certified the results following a post-election canvass. That certification has now been given to the State Board of Canvassers. They are scheduled to meet on Monday to formally certify the statewide electors and move forward from there. Going back to the seizure in Germany, it seems pretty clear to me that if it is true that Gina Haspel was not informed of this operation, then the servers did end up with the good guys. Why would Spain, computers in Spain, be involved at all in counting votes in an American presidential election? Servers in Germany, again, weren't Americans terribly spooked about the possibility of foreign interference in their presidential election? Now that it has been demonstrated, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the good guy won, and Trump is simply trying to disrupt. But wait a minute. Isn't that Silicon Valley is all about? Disruption. Isn't disruption considered to be a good thing? In the Federalist, their editor, John Davidson, said proof of an illegal vote harvesting scheme in Nevada was out there hiding in plain sight on Fox News Thursday. I don't have to have any secret sources of off-the-record meetings or anything like that, he said of his report exposing the Democratic operation buying votes for Joe Biden with gift cards and other prizes. Instead, Davidson said he drew on public social media posts featuring operatives engaging in conduct that is blatantly illegal. They documented it themselves on their Facebook pages, and there's dozens and dozens of instances of this. Photos, video, all over Nevada, this happened. Most of this connected to the Nevada Native Vote Project. Davison said, where voters would be lured to raffles in exchange for their absentee ballots. Bribing voters with anything of value, however, is illegal under federal election law, with sentences that can carry up to 2 years in prison or up to $10,000 in fines. Okay, I'm just going to make another adjustment. Sorry about that. I'll be right back. Better. No, that is definitely worse. So let's do that. Okay, that seems to be better. Laramie Hirsch says true actual foreign collusion on the part of the Democrats. They've tried to pin this on Trump for 3.5 years, yet the Democrats are the ones colluding with foreigners. Yes, I'll have more to say about that in just a minute. DeBarea says, I mean, you really have to have a good sense of humor to try stealing 50 million votes. YT points out that the left always projects like all psychotics do. Biden is leading in the most fraudulent vote ever seen, says DeBarea. Tricky Who says they made the theft obvious for a reason. Engineering a civil war takes time. Tom Anderson asks KMG, when will America split up into a few different countries? Things would have to get much worse, I think. Oh, of course, you know, what did they call it? The African Spring or whatever? A little more than a decade ago, when, oh yes, democracy is coming to North Africa. Didn't it have to do with a single Tunisian vendor who set himself on fire or something? You never know what incident is going to set off a revolution. And I just, say stick with general observations like those of Peter Turchin. DeBray says, no way in the world Biden had 70 million. Now the claim of 80 million, that Biden is going to get 80 million votes. That one is being made regularly now. Anran said KMG retweeted a video of German cops or Stasi arresting some COVID skeptic while he was live streaming in his home. Truly Orwellian stuff, or one could say truly German stuff. I don't think that people quite understand just how restricted a speech is in Germany. There's all sorts of, even compared to a place like Canada, they are fanatical about this, that there are certain subjects that can't be discussed. And now joining those supposedly is misinformation. There was a book that came out just a few years ago by I believe a well-respected scholar who made the argument that the Prophet Muhammad had never actually existed. I've seen the argument made by people in university that Joan of Arc never existed. So apparently there is not, if it is true that it is possible to nail down the truth, as far as the nonfiction part of the library goes, we could burn about 99% of it, couldn't we? Because you only need one book on any subject, because the truth has been determined for all times. Emmett Kelly Sir said, did you see that tweet from that fellow David Atkins that writes for the American Prospect Washington Monthly about deprogramming 75 million Trump voters? Yes, and I will get to it shortly. Okay, here we go. We're getting there. But let's talk about Lord Malloch Brown first. Who he, you ask? This is from Matthew Arrett at Strategic Culture Foundation. Throughout the 4-year drama of Russiagate, the hand of British intelligence has revealed itself continuously. From the obvious role of Sir Richard Dearlove and his former MI6 underlying Christopher Steele, who together played a driving role in shaping the dodgy dossier, to their involvement with Oxford Rhodes Scholar Strobe Talbot in composing, promoting, and marketing the fraudulent dossier to targeted members of Congress and media, to British Ambassador Sir Derek caught flooding the zone with British intelligence assets to shape Trump's perception of the world, to the array of British entrapment operations that targeted Michael Flynn as early as 2014 in London. Wherever one looks, the hand of British intelligence seems to be everywhere. While vast effort is made to downplay the British roots of the deep state by the media, which tends to portray this problem from a partisan narrative of Democratic Party corruption, this sleight of hand misses the causal nexus and demands we believe that the tail truly wags the dog. Election theft as Russiagate 5.0. Now that it has become increasingly clear that mass election fraud has swept across the USA in an effort to accomplish what 4 years of Russiagate failed to achieve, yet another light has fallen upon the British hand behind Biden, which aims to dissolve any nationalist spirit remaining in the embattled republic. As I outlined in my last report, the largest private computer voting system in the USA, which services 30 states and 70 million voters, was shown to be at the heart of the current election theft. In that article, it was made clear that Dominion Voting Systems is a Canadian company which dominates the USA's private computerized voting systems and is closely tied to another larger company called Smartmatic. For those still out of the loop, Smartmatic furnishes voting machines and its software, backdoor codes and all, to governments all around the world and is highly enmeshed with the Clinton Foundation, Soros's Open Society, and Nancy Pelosi's very own Chief of Staff. Not only that, but the key figure controlling Smartmatic is none other than Lord Malloch Brown, a former vice chairman of George Soros's investment funds, as well as Soros's Open Society Institute and the World Economic Forum, former vice president at the World Bank, UN Administrator for Development, UN Deputy Secretary General, and UK Minister of State for Africa, Asia, and the UN. These are just a few hats that he has worn in recent years, which he will explain in later detail. I won't explain it because this is a very long story, but you can find it at strategic-culture.org. Let's see what the latest is from Trump himself. And 1 hour ago, Representative Jody Hice had tweeted, as more votes are uncovered in Georgia, this race has continued to narrow. Americans want a fair vote with an honest count. It should not be a difficult ask. Georgia's election officials owe us a legitimate election. Trump responded, so true. Thanks, Jody. And he has retweeted a video on YouTube, Cyber Analyst on Dominion Voting, Shocking Vulnerabilities, Dominionizing the Vote, Trump said. And we are informed by Twitter that this claim about election fraud is disputed. Huge news in Wisconsin from Dan O'Donnell, where a disability services coordinator has come forward with evidence that every single one of her more than 20 severely disabled clients had their votes systematically stolen from them. Yes, the story goes that they were told that everyone here is voting for Biden. This to an old lady who had indicated she wanted to vote for Trump. And you do not want to get on the wrong side of the people who look after you in an old age home. You simply don't, because they will take it out on you in other ways, as the saying goes. Who would have thought that election abuse would be one more form of the many abuses our elders suffer in these places? Let's check in with Scott Adams, Breezewood KG, and J5 Killer. See what they have to say. 5 hours ago from Scott Adams, Biden refuses to concede despite hundreds of witnesses of election fraud, but I don't mind if he lets the process run. Jim Acosta had tweeted, Georgia has finished a statewide audit according to a press release from Georgia's Secretary of State office. President-elect Biden beat Trump by 12,284 votes, according to the final results from the audit. Adams commented, is audit an accurate word for it? I have personal knowledge of Philadelphia politics, and I can assure you that they would not try to steal an election. This from literally no one. AOC had tweeted, translation of the Republican Party stance, we can undermine the election by stripping Black Americans of their civil rights. Adams says, I've just been staring at this for 10 minutes. Yes, this is the argument that's being made, that Black Americans should be allowed to cheat and cheat and cheat and cheat, and any attempt to stop them from cheating constitutes systemic racism, disenfranchisement even. Oh, I see that BuzzFeed buys HuffPost in surprising media move. Scott Adams comments, turd eats a turd. Nice now, Lib Annihilator, KG. A poll, 46% of voters, this is from the Hill, say Trump should concede immediately. Jim Trutsley responds, so 54% say he shouldn't. Just Loki had tweeted, you know what's interesting about the Lincoln Project is that there's a CTO at Hawaii who has the same name as the Secretary of State of Georgia, who retweets a lot of their stuff. I'm sure there's no connection, though, even though it is a pretty uncommon last name. Okay, from J5 Killer. President-elect Ray had tweeted, the media is panicking because Trump is about to win. Caleb Hull had tweeted with regard to Brian Stelter, I laugh so hard every time I hear his Mickey Mouse voice. Cambry tweets, Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court judge ruled that 2,349 absentee ballots in Allegheny County, where the voter didn't date their declaration, are invalid, reversing a lower court judge. This is a Trump win. Okay, and the next subject is, let's talk about the New York Times. The New York Times, which all it does is lie now. I think if they removed all the obvious lies from the New York Times, all they'd be left with is recipes, assuming that they publish recipes. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. On the same day, the World Economic Forum heralded the Great Reset as a positive way to build future resilience to global risks. The New York Times declared the entire thing to be a conspiracy theory. Yes, really. The New York Times was apparently upset that the Great Reset was trending on Twitter and published an article declaring it to be a baseless conspiracy theory about the coronavirus. In reality, the WEF, NGOs, and world leaders have for months been hyping the need to exploit the opportunity, in the words of Justin Trudeau, provided by the pandemic to achieve the Great Reset. The New York Times report mentioned Trudeau, but buried the fact that he had openly labeled COVID-19 an opportunity during a UN conference call. On the same day, the Times asserted that the issue was a fever dream of far-right internet commentators. The World Economic Forum itself celebrated the Great Reset as a way to build future resilience to global risks. And what he had done was he went into Google search or some other search, and under news, typed the Great Reset, and top stories side by side from the World Economic Forum, The Great Reset, Building Future Resilience to Global Risks, one day ago. From the New York Times, again, side by side, the baseless Great Reset conspiracy theory rises again. The New York Times report then calls it an unfounded rumor that elites are using the pandemic, quote, to impose their global economic control on the masses, unquote, despite the fact that Davos globalist Carl Schwab specifically announces this very agenda in his recent book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. As we previously highlighted, Schwab also endorses a technocratic dictatorship whereby people would accept implantable microchips that can read their thoughts, as well as brain scans to be allowed to travel. Suffice to say, the Times completely failed to mention Schwab's book at all. The New York Times then evidently contacted both Twitter and Facebook in an attempt to get information about the Great Reset removed, but Twitter refused to do so and Facebook didn't respond. So in other words, in its attempt to persuade people that the elite aren't pursuing a nefarious Great Reset, the newspaper of the elite lobbied to have information about this conspiracy, which doesn't exist, removed from public consumption. Yeah, that's really going to convince them. In a way, I'm rather admiring of just how brazen these people have become. They live in a world where I guess there are no consequences for misbehavior. There's no consequences for unethical, immoral behavior. I don't know. There's no consequences for stealing an election, or so they think. And let's see. This is from Davy Alba's. Yes, reporters now have names like Davy Alba. This is from her report in the New York Times. Yes, it's a woman called Davy. Joan Donovan, the research director at Harvard University's Shorenstein Center, said it is maddening to see the same networks of influencers traffic in recycled conspiracies and get in the way of delivering accurate information to the public. What is true is that COVID is on the rise in the US because of poor leadership and the lack of a nationally coordinated response, Ms. Donovan said. Oh, and names are named by the New York Times. Paul Joseph Watson, and Stephen Crowder are named. Now, yes, Build Back Better. Justin Trudeau has been using that incomprehensible slogan for several months now, following Joe Biden. And guess who else uses that slogan? Officially, the Conservative Party of Great Britain. Yeah, how about that? But there's nothing coordinated about this at all. That would be a tinfoil hat talk. So I went to Davy Alba's Twitter feed, and does the New York Times only hire foreigners now? Because Davy Alba is not only a woman, she is a Filipina. And she has not been, let's go to Wikipedia. She was born in Manila and attended De La Salle University. She came to the United States at age 23. Yeah. Oh, she's worked at BuzzFeed News and Wired and Gizmodo before joining the New York Times as a technology reporter in 2019. Her area of coverage is disinformation and all of its tentacles. Ooh, tentacles. Frightened yet? See, if you have a disagreement with anyone, it's disinformation, which has tentacles now. Davy Alba tweeted this about her own story. The Great Reset trended on Twitter yesterday. These people can't make up their minds on whether they want a reset or whether the elites already control everything, which in case, why would they want a huge reset? Is she really that stupid? They would want a reset because they do not have total control of political power or of economic power. That's why they would want a reset. From the time that we started hearing about globalism, of the New World Order, and this was let's say, starting from 1991, the end of history, that everything was going to be different, that the world was going to be more efficient, and that this was going to be good for the world. The world was going to get richer. And then the truth leaked out that the world might be getting richer in the aggregate, but you, unless you were a member of the elite, are very much not going to get richer. But, beans can be delicious if prepared properly, and don't forget cheap chalupas. And after 2008, there was a really strong backlash about this because these experts had pretty much destroyed the world economy, and it was a very close-run thing of the world economy simply collapsing. And then you see the reaction against this reflected in things like Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, which of course was met with a temper tantrum. That's not a strong enough phrase. How about gibbering hysteria? And so I guess it was decided that we're not going to allow a situation whereby there could be a Brexit vote where the British people could vote to leave the European Union, or someone like Donald Trump could be elected president of the United States. But Davy Alba, apparently there's not enough stupid, ignorant journalism candidates in the United States, so the New York Times has to import them from abroad. Oh, and I'm looking at the front page of the New York Times. Trump targets Michigan in his ploy to subvert the election. In a brazen step, President Trump invited Republican leaders in Michigan to the White House as he tried to stop the state from certifying Joe Biden's win. The effort to undo the vote is all but certain to fail, as even many Trump allies concede. It's already suffered defeats in courts in multiple states. Yes, this is the newspaper of record. Fair and balanced. Let's see. Targets, ploy, subvert, brazen. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, yes, Craig Silverman. And who is he when he's at home? Well, he's the media editor at BuzzFeed News. He covers platforms, misinfo, fake news. Reliable source, certainly. He tweeted this. New internal Facebook data shows that labels placed on Trump's false election posts only reduced their spread by 8%, making no real difference. Meanwhile, 3 false Trump claims are the most engaged post on Facebook over the last 24 hours. To which I responded, clickbait editor demands that his status as a member of the Truth Commissariat be recognized. The irony, it burns. How about this? If Twitter and Facebook had been around in 2002, 2003, we would have been lectured constantly. These claims that there are no weapons of mass destruction, yes, there are weapons of mass destruction. The New York Times says there's a mass destruction. All the great and good say there are weapons of mass destruction. Also, it seems pretty likely that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. These were all lies, but the media was telling us that, so you're not in favor of an invasion. So I guess you're supportive of Saddam Hussein then, are you? The media doesn't ever seem to be punished for its errors. And the people like Judith Miller, well, she got away with it, didn't she? I suppose to a certain extent, she was a sacrificial lamb. The UN inspectors said there's no evidence of weapons of mass destruction. And this is a very strange thing because typically we're told, well, the UN says something is true, or the UN says that we must do something, so we must do it. What are you, some sort of isolationist? You're the kind of guy who probably would have supported, Hitler in 1941. Why do they get away with this? I suppose to a certain extent that they did it and we let them get away with it. Again, about the New York Times, this is from Jordan Davidson at Breitbart. A New York Times contributor complained that those who voted for President Donald Trump this election refused to have productive conversations with him. Unsurprisingly, it turns out this same writer has spent the better part of the last year insulting and mischaracterizing the very type of person he claims to have attempted to reach out to. New York Times contributor and self-proclaimed member of his own resistance, Wajahat Ali, wrote an article published Thursday in which he explained these efforts to reach out were not actually listening or having conversations with Trump supporters, but offers to give politically charged speeches to audiences in red states. He lamented these efforts were made impossible because many Trump voters have accepted the president as, quote, an extension of their id, their culture, their values, their greed. I assumed I could win over some Trump supporters whose frustrations and grievances had been manipulated by those intent on seeing people like me as invaders intent on replacing them. Who could possibly see Wajahat Ali as part of an invasion meant to replace them? No, come on, that's not possible. That would be outrageous, absolutely outrageous. Wajahat Ali is a New York Times contributing op-ed writer, public speaker, recovering attorney, and tired dad of 2 cute kids. Isn't that adorable? He believes in sharing stories that are by us for everyone, universal narratives told through a culturally specific lens to entertain, educate, and bridge the social divides. Can you imagine that? This is his own description from his own website. And I just, when did it become acceptable for Pakistanis to lecture Americans on what's what and what's permitted and what is not? He tweeted, now I look forward to all the lonely, totally not racist emails in my inbox that will prove my article. It would be difficult to find people who are more racist in the world than those who live on the Indian subcontinent, but never mind. And again, from Paul Joseph Watson. Now, you might find yourself complaining that the stories that I've been referring to in the last few weeks have increasingly been from the same 6 or 8 or 10 sources. And there's a reason for that, because the rest of the media, the mainstream media, has gone into lockdown. It is not Trump contesting the election. It is Trump subverting the election. So there's really no point in looking for information from such sites. Leftists suggest re-education camps, firing squads, banning talk radio to deprogram 75 million Trump supporters. Leftists responded to a Twitter thread asking, how do you deprogram 75 million people, by suggesting Trump supporters should be interned in re-education camps and that all conservative talk radio should be banned. Now, seriously, how do you deprogram 75 million people? Where do you start? Fox, Facebook, asked David Atkins, a regional director for California Democrats. We have to start thinking in terms of post-World War II Germany or Japan, or the failures of Reconstruction in the South. Ooh, I don't know. Maybe they could resurrect Sherman and have him march to the sea again. That would probably take out a lot of Trump supporters. Atkins tweeted, this is not your standard partisan policy disagreement. This is a conspiracy theory-fueled belligerent death cult against reality and basic decency. Oh, I see a leftist lecturing others on basic decency. Ho, ho, very satirical. The only actual policy debates of note are happening within the Dem coalition between left and center left. Oh, in other words, between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And they say history doesn't repeat itself. Oh, Joyce Carol Oates, who is so very precious that she refuses to spell out Trump's name. She puts 3 asterisks in the middle as if Trump is some sort of, tetragrammaton. For many pro-Trump Americans, as she tweeted today, the pandemic is like the Holocaust. Oh, here we go again. to many Germans. They knew what was happening, but adjusted to living with it in indifference, or in some cases profiting from it. Only if affected personally do people seem to care. You mean like death? Generally, they knew what was happening. That is to say that people are dying every day, lots of them, and that in fact we're all going to die, but adjusted to living with it in indifference. Yeah. There's not a lot of people who spend much time thinking, I'm going to die one day. There's nothing I can do about it. So I don't know, maybe I should start working on my soul. Not very many people do that very often. Or in some cases, profiting from it. Oh, you mean like the entire industries built around death and people who are close to death? Only if affected personally do people seem to care. Yes. Goes to computer, brings up website. 10,000 people die in tsunami in Asia. That's sad. But since it doesn't affect me personally, I'm not going to get all that het up about it. So to take Joyce Carol Oates seriously, how is COVID-19 different than just everyday life and death? Speaking of religion, Representative Ilhan Omar has gone into the exegesis business. This is from the Daily Mail. Ilhan Omar was slammed on Wednesday when she misspelled the Gospel of Matthew and was accused of misinterpreting a Bible verse while attempting to school Senator Marco Rubio on his Christian faith. The Muslim congresswoman had hit out in a tweet to Rubio, calling him a disgrace and shameful after he criticized a video of a sermon delivered by Democratic Georgia Senate candidate Raphael Warnock. In the sermon, Warnock, who is a pastor, appeared to claim that a person cannot serve God and the military at the same time. And this is what Ilhan Omar tweeted, and then some emoji expressing astonishment. Matthews, with an S and one T, 624, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and D-money. I don't know what translation of the Bible that she is quoting from. Typically, that last word in that paragraph is mammon. The lies and smears of the GOP have no boundaries, but this is a disgrace and shameful. Oh, I see a Muslim is lecturing Christians on Christianity. The point here, she continued, is that as a Muslim, I know that Reverend Warnock is quoting scripture in his sermon here, as I am sure Rubio does too, but he is willing to lie and make a mockery of himself. That sentence is very poorly worded and means the opposite of what she thinks it means. But Ilhan Omar does not understand English very well. So apparently, the Reverend Warnock and others believe that mammon equals the military. Yeah, this is their exegesis, okay? And in the same way that, you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Pillar of Salt and all that? No, you got it all wrong. It has nothing to do with homosexuality. It was because of a lack of welcoming. Yeah, they've been pushing this line for, 50 years or so? And Joe Biden is a gibbering wreck. He's speaking to governors after meeting governors, but you knew that already, right? I'm going to go to Theater Thursday in just a minute, but I will catch up with the chat here. Okay. Luke relapsed back on porn, says Debereas. Oh, okay. I don't know exactly what that means. Octopus Knight says the left will not stop until good people respond in kind. This is not sinking to their level. It's called self-defense and defense of the innocent. YT says at least they aren't calling it quarantine anymore. And also, I only listen to Pakistanis, to be honest. Brandon Smith says reset loosely translates to we are taking whatever shit you have and sending you welfare checks from now on instead. Yeah, you're going to have a central authority and it's going to provide everything that you need. So you don't need to own anything. This is directly from the World Economic Forum. You don't need to own anything. People are really atavistic about that. When I started to hear hipsters boasting about how they didn't own any physical media, no CDs, no DVDs, no Blu-ray, I thought, even the serf had a few treasured possessions. Didn't this theologian marry her own brother, says Chogokin 666? That would appear to be the case. But doing anything about it, well, that'd be racist, wouldn't it? And it would be anti-immigrant. But since Trump has been widely assailed as a racist and as anti-immigrant, I don't see how it could hurt him to go after Ilhan Omar directly or direct the Department of Justice to do so. On Theater Thursday, our film today is from 1932, and it is called I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. It is directed by Mervyn Leroy, and it stars Paul Muni. This is a pre-code film, and this is a message film or a social problem film, and I'll be discussing both of those terms. But I wanted to start with Mervyn Leroy. He had a remarkable career in that he directed hit films over the period of decades, almost 40 years. A really remarkable record. He was also instrumental in the production of The Wizard of Oz. When I read about these old-timey directors, there's a huge difference between the people who worked in the first couple of generations in Hollywood and those who came afterwards, because you see so often people who had a great variety of experience in their lives. I'm reading from Wikipedia here. Leroy was born in 1900 in San Francisco to Jewish parents. The 1906 earthquake, which destroyed his father's import-export business, left his family in financial ruin. After his father's death in 1910, young Mervyn worked selling newspapers in front of the Alcazar Theater. From this sales location, he was given a bit part for a play. Through his winning a Charlie Chaplin impersonation contest, he moved into vaudeville and then minor parts in silent movies. He worked in costumes, processing labs, and as a camera assistant until he became a gag writer and actor in silent films, including The Ten Commandments in 1923. Leroy credits Ten Commandments director Cecil B. DeMille for inspiring him to become a director. So Leroy would be considered, I suppose, a journeyman director, much like his Warner Brothers counterpart, Michael Curtiz. But it turns out that these journeyman directors, Curtiz and Leroy are good examples. They made a lot of fine films. And if you look at the films that he directed, there's a lot of remarkable ones there. Little Caesar from 1930. Which made Edward G. Robinson a star, and I guess began the mania for gangster films. I'm a Fugitive from Chain Gang came out in 1932. He made Gold Diggers of 1933, which, with its Busby Berkeley scenes, is one of the great melange of drama and musical and enormously successful movie. He made Anthony Adverse, and he made 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which is just a tremendous movie about the Doolittle raid during World War II. He made Quo Vadis, one of the most successful sword and sandal Epics, Mr. Roberts, which he took over from John Ford, The Bad Seed, and in 1962 he made Gypsy with Rosalind Russell and Natalie Wood, about Gypsy Rose Lee, the famous stripper, which was again an enormous success. So, I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang is what they call a pre-code film. So what does that mean? Well, it's a reference to the motion picture production code, which is often referred to as the Hays Code. And it was called that because Will Hays was the president of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. Hollywood had two very serious problems in the 1930s. One was the behavior of the people in Hollywood, that there had been numerous scandals, the case of Fatty Arbuckle being one of the most notorious, where America, or much of America, was rankly scandalized by the goings-on, real or imagined, in Hollywood. The second was that Hollywood pictures, not all of them, but many of them, were seen to be immoral and to have a poor effect on public morals. And this argument was put forward most strongly by the Catholic Church, which was very powerful in America at that time. But it was not just the Catholics who complained about this. Oh yes, one of these other scandals was the murder of William Desmond Taylor, which Peter Bogdanovich made a film about this. The murder has actually never been solved, and all sorts of famous people have been named as his murderer. So Hollywood decided that they were going to rein themselves in. There has been a vogue for pre-code films for quite a long time, and I suppose DVD and Blu-ray have rescued a great many of these films that had not been seen for decades. I suppose part of the attraction is simply prurient. The kind of language that was used, the kind of clothing or lack of it, which was permitted, the sexual content that was permitted, often highly sexual content. It seems the pre-code films seem more modern to us than the films that followed from 1934 and continued up. The code, there was a rebellion against the code, which gained enormous strength during the 1960s. And by 1970s, the code was pretty much dead, with the result that beginning circa 1970, pretty much every movie that you went to that wasn't made specifically for children had nudity in it. Oh, here's a woman, and she's come home from work, and then she opens the door to her apartment, and she closes the door, and she walks into her bedroom, and she starts taking her clothing off. She's changing out of her work clothes. And is there any particular reason we need to see this? No, it's just we can show that on the screen now. And so we are going to. One of the problems for me of the code, I don't deny that the code was salutary in many ways, but it imposed a kind of Greek inevitability on all of the movies because of the things that were permitted and were not permitted. For instance, I only first saw the Asphalt Jungle directed by John Huston about 15 years ago. And I was about, 40 minutes into it. And I thought, this is great. Why haven't I seen this before? And they hit me. I know exactly how this movie is going to end, because since it came out in 1950, there was no other way that this movie could end. Okay, so things that you were not allowed to do. And here's a list of things. Okay, pointed profanity. This includes the word God, Lord, Jesus, and Christ. Any licentious or suggestive nudity, in fact or in silhouette, and any lecherous or licentious notice thereof, the illegal traffic in drugs, any inference of sex perversion, white slavery, miscegenation, sex hygiene and venereal diseases, scenes of actual childbirth, children's sex origins, ridicule of the clergy, willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. Under the code, villains had to be punished, and they had to be seen to be punished rather. It was not enough, cheaters never prosper, right? Well, cheaters do in fact prosper, and it's really remarkable when you look at, say, the noir films, how they manage to subtly get around the code or to imply things. You had to be quite subtle indeed. For instance, Peter Lorre's scented handkerchief in The Maltese Falcon. Oh, well, that demonstrates that he's a homosexual. The first time I saw that, I thought, what? It does? I don't know. He's Hungarian. Maybe they do that sort of thing in Hungary. But yes, so the code, very, very limiting indeed. Couldn't show toilets even, all sorts of things. You didn't have, man and wife sleeping in the same bed, So this is a pre-code film, and one of the ways that we know that's a pre-code film is the behavior of Paul Muni's wife in it. He is pretty much coerced into marriage. It's a very unhappy marriage. His wife is cheating on him openly and spending all of his money, and an enormous amount of money, and she decides to ruin him because he announces to her that he is no longer going to put up with her blackmail. Now, in a code film, this woman would have had to be punished. No question about it. But as far as we know, she gets away scot-free. There's another scene in this film where, after what appears to be a miraculous escape, our hero, James Allen, or Alan James, Paul Muni, ends up under the protection of a man who had been with him in the chain gang, what's presumably Georgia. And so he's got a place to stay where he is safe. And would you like some alcohol? He's asked. No. He's tired, exhausted. Would you like some female company? Nah. No, well, it's on the house. And this slinky young blonde comes in, and I think that slinky is the only way to describe her. And she makes it known, like pretty much up front, what she is willing to do for him. And we have a fade out, and she says the line, we're all friends here. And I guess, what do friends do? The way she's dressed, the amount of breast that she is exposing, the tightness of her garments, all of this would have been verboten under the code. So what is a message film or a social problem film? Well, it's a film that draws attention to an injustice or a perceived injustice. And it goes into the details of how this is bad, why this is bad, and it seeks to incite outrage amongst viewers, or at least to have them think about a question, an important social question, which they had not thought of before. And in I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, it is the chain gang itself. Where prisoners were not kept in penitentiaries because Georgia did not have a state penitentiary. And so they are, in effect, made slaves. They are sent out in chains to break up rocks, to make areas amenable to developers, is what they're doing. And the state earns money from this. And this was genuinely shocking to a lot of people, because the accepted view then and now is that people are sent to prison as punishment, not for punishment. Warner Brothers, what did they have? Well, they had gangster films, and they had message films as well. Now, this involves some risk because a lot of these subjects involved are subjects that people consider to be depressing. They would really rather not think about it. And it was certainly a risk for Warner Brothers to make I Am a Fugitive for a chain gang. I'm going to be talking about another message film next week, which is Frank Capra's Meet John Doe, which I guess is it's about the problems of the poor in America, the unemployed, but it is also an indictment of the press, or what we call the media now, in its willingness, in its gleeful willingness to exploit the miserable in order to make money. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang is based on a true story, although it has significant differences. There was a fellow called Robert Elliott Burns who went through much of what was described in I Am a Fugitive for a Chain Gang, that he served in World War I, as Paul Muni's character does. And he's unable to secure regular employment. And in Atlanta, Burns claims that he was tricked into taking part of a robbery of a grocery store, which ended up with the proceeds being less than $6. Now, that sounds like nothing, but in this movie, James Allen is given $7 before his first escape by a convict called Bomber. And apparently, let's see, what could $7 buy you in 1932? It could buy you a suit of clothes, including a tie and a hat, and shoes, and a night in a hotel, and 2 hamburgers, a Coke, and a train ticket. So $7 went a long way in 1932. One of the main differences between the real story and the story that is filmed is that Paul Muni's character is indeed innocent of the crime of armed robbery, or he only took part in this under extreme duress. That is to say, he had a pistol pointed at his stomach that, take the money from the till or I will kill you. It appears that in the real story, Burns, he was much more amenable to this. That presents a dramatic problem. I remember in a review of the movie version of The Fugitive, starring Harrison Ford, one of the reviewers claimed that the story would be more powerful if Richard Kimball had actually been guilty of killing his wife. And I tend to agree with that point of view, because it is more powerful for an audience to cheer for something that they know that they shouldn't be cheering for. In my case, and I know I'm not alone in this, I always cheer for anyone who's trying to escape prison, no matter who they are or what they have done, because prisons are inhuman. The prison system as we know it, it hardly existed before, say, the year 1900. Before that, there were debtors' prisons, but crime was dealt with execution, with deportation, or with mutilation. Because confining men in prison for any length of time is going to drive them crazy. It's going to make them unfit to live. They are broken by this experience. And it is, I don't know, it's difficult for me to think about people rotting away in prison, again, because it is an inhuman system. But it was felt necessary at the time to make our hero, James Allen, innocent. We are driven to like this man because, you know, he fought for his country in the war, and he comes home and he's looking for gainful employment. Now he has it. He had a clerical job in a factory before he fought for his country, but he doesn't want this job. He wants to make something of himself. He learned engineering when he was in the army, and he thinks that he can apply this to work back home in America. And so, of course, he's a very sympathetic character because he's a man who wants to better himself. So he is convicted of this crime and sentenced to 8 years on a chain gang. And this is where the movie really begins to shine because we are shown just how grotesque the conditions are. Constantly being chained. There's no escape from being chained. And there's a tremendous scene where we see him, Paul Muni, for the first time, sitting at a table with the other convicts, eating the meal. And the meal is fried dough and pig grease, sorghum. It is utterly disgusting. And he can't eat it. He literally can't eat it. And all the other convicts think this is very amusing. And we see some of the other convicts, and they're just tearing into this disgusting meal because that is the level to which they have been reduced. We learn, and this is all true, that there's no excuse for not working hard. It doesn't matter whether you're sick. It doesn't matter whether you are on death's door. You will be worked to death if necessary. And if you didn't want to be worked literally to death, well, I guess you shouldn't have been sent here in the first place. The guards and their leadership are constantly looking for any trivial offenses to give them an excuse to whip the prisoners. And again, there's a beautiful scene where we were shown a whipping for the first time, but we're not shown it. It is just off camera. And the camera lingers on the faces of the other convicts and the horror, the desolation in their eyes. Because they know that it could happen to any of them. And this is a punishment which literally scarred these men for life, that the whole of their back would be covered with the scars from this enormous instrument of torture. So we hear the prisoners talking about how long it is till they're going to get out. Well, I only have, 7 years and 4 months left, that sort of thing. And Paul Muni, who's an intelligent man, realizes that there's no way that he could make this. He simply could not survive such a long sentence under such conditions. And he asks the prisoner, it's called Bomber, a beautiful performance by Edward Ellis, if anyone has ever escaped, out on the lam, they say. And everyone says, no, impossible. You've got to get past the dogs. You got to get past the guards and their rifles. You got to get past the police after that. And Balmer tells him, it's been done. It's been done a couple of times. And he seems to be up for any kind of escape, at least to help Paul Muni. And we see there was segregation in Georgia at the time, and there's segregation in this prison camp between the whites and the Negroes. If you look at the blackboard, it appears that the Negroes outnumber the whites by about 2 to 1. There's a particularly sad scene where we see this exceedingly muscular a black man who is just displays incredible strength in breaking rocks, and he never misses. They say, he could bring his hammer down on a nickel, and it would, take off the buffalo from it. And one of them says, they'll never let him leave because he's too valuable. Paul Muni, he has an idea. He asks him if he could hit the binding around his ankle, both of them, to loosen it up. Now, this is very dangerous, of course, because of he was lucky that this black prisoner was so very skillful with his hammer, because the possibility of shattering his ankle, or to the extent of maybe having to lose one of his feet or both of them, was a very high one. But it manages to be loosened, and then we see him take a rest, or what do they call it? Oh yes, 2 minutes to brush your teeth. These are urination or otherwise voiding periods. So he takes it and he loosens it. Very tense, very, very tense scene where you know that he's running out of time. And the guard is already beginning to wonder where he is. He manages to get the shackles off, and then his boots back on, and he runs for it, and then the dogs are unleashed. And I have to say again, in any situation where a man is being chased down by dogs, I'm rooting for the man and not the dogs. But beautiful, really, really impressive use of, underwater photography. I've spoken of underwater photography in the past, and I find it boring because it's very difficult to understand anything that's going on. But Paul Muni, he's in swamp country, and the dogs are closing in on him, and he has a brilliant idea, which is that he can breathe underwater. How can he breathe underwater? Well, there are all these reeds in the swamp, and he snaps one so that it's about 3 feet long, and he settles at the bottom, and he breathes through the reed, and you can see the bubbles from his nose coming up. And one of the guards actually gets into the particular part of swamp where he is, and you see that he passes within a foot or two from him. And of course, the reason he was able to escape was because it never occurred to the guard that anyone would be so daring and audacious as to contrive a way to breathe underwater. So as soon as the guards have left the vicinity, he hot-foots it out of there, steals some clothes from a clothing line, and he's got his $7, which buys all of the things I told you about previously. And so he manages to escape from the town, and it's a very close call again, and you think that he's done for, but the police are chasing someone in shabby clothing. So you can see that full suit of clothing that he bought was a very wise investment. He also, that $7 also buys a shave. And there's a scene where a policeman, or the chief of police, comes into the barbershop where he's having a shave. And I have to believe that this scene in I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, inspired a very similar theme in the movie by Jean-Pierre Melville, Army of Darkness, where a man, Lino Ventura, has escaped from a prison, and he is attempting to evade the Vichy authorities. So he needs to find work. This was his problem. This was James Allen's problem right from the very beginning, that he couldn't find work. Well, he manages to find work, and what's he doing? Well, pretty much, chain gang work. But he impresses his supervisor right from the very beginning. We don't know what exactly he said, something about the bend, but it is clear that he knows, more about building than your regular rock breaker or rock shifter. And we see there's two rather standard but old-timey and I think delightful devices that are used to indicate the passage of time. One is the pages, the monthly pages of the calendar falling, but the little trick they use is they see a pickaxe hitting the calendar, and then a page a month drops away. And James Allen's progress in the world of construction is shown by his punch-in card, and we see what his current job is and how much money he is making. And he rises fairly quickly up the structure of this organization. And we see that his confidence in himself, and perhaps our confidence in him, was rewarded, because given the opportunity, here was a man who could contribute, who could better himself and do work for the betterment of all. And what was it Francois Villon said? Booze and the blow-ins cop the lot. Dames are trouble. He's looking for a place to stay, and he stops at a boarding house. And there is a blonde who is played by Glenda Farrell. Her name is Marie, a very inappropriate name. Glenda Farrell became very popular in the 1930s as Torchy Blaine, where she was the wisecracking blonde that everyone loved. And of course, well, she had first made a name for herself in Little Caesar. She is a horrible, horrible person in this film. Venal, I suppose, is the best way to describe her. We see that these blondes seem to have an attraction to Paul Muni, I suppose, because of his intensity. And she sets her cap at James Allen, Paul Muni, and what is it, $25 a week for this suite of rooms. And it's a very handsome suite of rooms. And he says, well, I like it, but I can't pay for it. And she says, how about $20 a week? And it's very clear that in exchange for his $5 a week discount, he is expected to have sex with Marie. Now, this obviously would not make it past the code. But there's a problem with men having sex with women, is that the women often think that it's significant, which is why it's a good rule of thumb not to have casual sex with women. There's many other reasons not to have casual sex with women, but you may think that it's casual. All too often, the woman does not think that it's casual. And Marie, some period of time has passed, and it's clear that Marie has got her hooks fully into James Allen, or Alan James, as he now styles himself, and that he does not love her. He does not even really like her, and he's finding it difficult to disguise that fact. And marriage, who's talking about marriage? I never talked about marriage. Yeah, well, they get married. And she thinks that there's something strange about this man. Well, there is strange about a man who never talks about himself, never talks about his past, doesn't seem to have any kin. And she's clever enough to realize that there's probably a secret there, a secret I can use to my advantage. And soon enough, he gets a letter, or there's a letter sent to him from his brother, who is a clergyman, appears to be a Protestant clergyman in the movie, whereas in the real life case of Burns, it was a Catholic priest. But then the jig is truly up, and you're going to stay with me forever, and I'm going to do whatever I want, and I'm going to spend all your money, because if you make a fuss, I'm going to denounce you to the authorities, and they're going to send you right back to the chain gang for another 7 years plus. And so he puts up with it. And he rises very high in the construction company where he works. And he is, this is in Chicago, and he is a rising young star of Chicago. And the media and organizations like the Chamber of Commerce are starting to take an interest in him. You know, he gets invited to swank parties and invited to make speeches. And, well, he meets another woman, played by Helen Vinson. And it's at this point that he decides to make a gamble, a foolish gamble, that here's a woman who loves him and he loves her. Now, again, this is based somewhat on the real events, but the real events were rather more tawdry than are portrayed in I Am a Fugitive. I have to say something about the women in this film, and the women, I guess, of the late 20s, early 30s. It seemed that everyone had to be blonde. Everyone had to have dyed blonde curly hair. And I suppose Jean Harlow is, like the epitome of that. I don't really think this is a particularly good look, actually. It seems to me that curly hair is something that it's difficult for women to pull off. But that was the style. I guess the other style is the gamin look. That this sort of boyishness, a boyishness in the figure. Often, the short hair accentuating the boyishness. But I suppose, what most distinguished the women of that period from the women previous to them and then the women later to them is in the style of clothing or of undergarments. That is to say, no undergarments, no bras, no girdles. And I suppose this goes very well with the gamin or boyish figure. After that craze fell out, we again saw, full-figured women in the movies. But there's an interesting period to me where it just seemed like, a kind of, virus had taken over in that, women in the movies must all look like this, regardless of whether it was actually attractive or not. So Alan James, or James Allen, he tells his horrific wife, Marie, look, I'm demanding a divorce. I will give you everything that I have. And she's quite a rational thinker. And in effect, she tells him, you'll give me everything you have, but then after I've spent it, there'll be no more money. If I force you to remain married to me, then I can leech off you forever and still do whatever I want with whomever I want. This is the kind of situation which frequently leads to murder. That is to say, the man murdering the woman. But Glenda Farrell, she does an excellent job of portraying a woman who is so confident in her brazenness that, no, you can't murder me. I wouldn't allow it. She doesn't say that, but you can see that is how she is thinking. So at the acme of his career, detectives burst in, and he's arrested. And this story becomes a nationwide story, a front page story, because the authorities in the state of Illinois do not want to extradite him to Georgia. Now, the state is never made clear in the movie because Southerners, particularly those in the state of Georgia, were absolutely infuriated by the book and the movie. So it's some unnamed Southern state. And so he's taken into custody, and he has a decision to make because the Georgian authorities, they want to make a deal that their amour propre must be preserved. That we can't, the whole country is laughing at us now. So how about you come back voluntarily and you just serve 6 months and we'll give you a job in the office or whatever, and then we'll let you go. And he has to hire a Georgian lawyer at an enormous fee, which gives you some idea of how much money he must have been earning in Chicago. And he makes the fateful decision. The new love of his life, Helen, thinks that it's a good idea. And again, pre-code nature of this. Well, the authorities have given their word. These are the duly authorized people in charge of the prison system. They wouldn't lie, particularly when it deals with a man's life. No, that would be unthinkable. Well, that's exactly what they do. The first off is that the chain gang that he's sent to is the very worst, apparently, in the state of Georgia, and he is not given a job in the office. He is out there, and it is even grimmer than the first time around to see him breaking rocks in what must be a temperature of 100 degrees, and they're working pretty much 16 hours a day. But I can make it. And so his parole comes up, and they bring the pastor in, and eloquent speeches are made, and he's fulfilled his part of his bargain, and he's told that, oh no, the parole board isn't going to make a decision, and it's indefinite. And it's at that point that our hero becomes a truly haunted man. That any aspirations, I don't know, towards a normal life or morality that he had, they're gone. It's over. He enlists Bomber for a second escape, and this becomes, front page news all over America again, but he disappears. He disappears into the shadows, quite literally. In fact, I won't spoil the ending for you, but it has a final shot, which is beautiful and also terrifying, and one of the most famous ending lines in the history of movies. I'm really impressed by this film. People today watching it are going to find, I think they're going to find a lot of it corny, particularly the part of the film when he returns from the war and he's reunited with his family, that sort of thing. I should explain that people actually did talk like that in those days, and that, as you can see from photographs of the Depression, say, of destitute people, that they wore a jacket and a hat if they had one, that people were desperate to be considered respectable. And, the heroic talk from James Allen, about bettering himself and just being given a chance, that's how people thought in those days. And speech was far more formal then. And it was only, I don't know, a reprobates or the lowest of the low who didn't attempt to speak in at least a semi decent way. The complete formality in speech, behavior, and dress that took over, I don't know, from the late 60s, early 70s, all of that was just unthinkable. You know, put it this way, that you may find the world of the America shown of the 1920s and the early 1930s to be, you know, barely thinkable, but those people looking at our world today would have considered it to be totally unthinkable. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang is available on a Warner Brothers DVD. It looks good, considering its age, that is 88 years old. The blacks are black, and there's a lot of black in this movie. I can't complain about the transfer at all. I like this movie very much as a piece of drama, but also as a, how shall we say, anthropological document. So those are my thoughts on I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. Oh, we're talking about dogs in the chat. So the moral of the story is things can always get unimaginably worse. Yeah, I suppose that is, but you know what is really crushing about it is you see the similar thing in in Les Miserables. There's lots of people who say that given a second chance, I'll turn things around. Well, how many people actually do? Most people, given this second chance, they almost immediately going back to doing the things that they had done that got them into trouble in the first place. Paul Muni, I suppose Paul Muni is considered to be an over-actor now. It's just the school, school of acting, Hollywood School of Acting, associated, say, with Yiddish theater, very, very intense. Muni, he later specialized in films that I suppose, you would call Oscar bait. The story of Louis Pasteur, The Good Earth, The Life of Émile Zola, that sort of thing. But you get a far less mannered performance from him in I Am a Fugitive than you do in his later efforts. Okay. Matt Beck says, Yo Mama, I liked Imaginably Worse better. It has panache. Actually, it does. I liked it too. I knew that it was a stylism, but there's a sort of tinge of desperation in the idea of imaginably worse. Many people, I suppose that perhaps most people throughout history have lived lives of, where things are imaginably worse. It is only, this idea that things always get better and better, the Whig idea of the Whig interpretation of history. It's only been internalized for, 3-4 generations? Previous generations knew that no matter how things looked and how things to be going up and up and up. Imagine Mervyn Leroy. Imagine his parents, that they have this successful business in San Francisco, and what could go wrong? Oh, an earthquake. We didn't count on that. Yes, there's always something that can happen. Anyway, Fugitive Chain Gang, definitely part of the classic film noir canon. Yeah, I suppose you could call this an example of film noir, because the lesson of film noir, it's been described as things will only get worse. Anron says perhaps Kevin could start doing one movie a month that is chosen by the chat. Yeah, I'm interested in that, but I'd like to know more about the mechanics, say, of being chosen by the chat. Is it possible to, put surveys up in the chat? I don't know that that's possible, and in any event, one day's worth of the chat might not be representative. I'll tell you though that if I were to review movies chosen by the chat, there's a very strong possibility that movies are going to be chosen that I do not like. And I have made it an almost iron rule that I only talk about movies that I like. I suppose people could ask me, why have you never reviewed Blade Runner? The original one. And the reason that I've never reviewed Blade Runner is, well, I admire it technically. I do not like the movie. I do not think that it is a good movie for all sorts of reasons. Okay. Mediahead says in romantic comedies, when the male player comes at a crossroads after meeting a certain female, in real life, the player would probably stop seeing that girl and move on to someone else for marriage. I don't know. Have you ever seen A Place in the Sun? Which is George Stevens' version of Dreiser's An American Tragedy. Okay, so let's talk about the movie. So Montgomery Clift, he has a girlfriend, and it's Shelley Winters. And Shelley Winters was once a very attractive, you could say zaftig, if you like, woman. And life is good. And then he meets Elizabeth Taylor. This is in the early 1950s. And suddenly, Shelley Winters, what was I thinking? Apparently this Elizabeth Taylor woman, she's the most beautiful woman in the world, and she's quite taken with me. And it turns out that Shelley Winters is pregnant. Yeah, it's, it's not that easy. Again, before the relaxation of sexual morals, it was a dangerous thing to get into a sexual relationship with a woman. Dangerous for all sorts of reasons. One of which might be that, say, you have an affair with a woman, and then you dump her, and then her father or her brothers come looking for you, and maybe they have a switch, or maybe they have a shotgun. So let's see what is up next week on Theater Thursday. Oh, I mentioned that already. Another message picture, if you will. It's called Meet John Doe, and it's by Frank Capra. And there's a lot of desperation, in Capra's films. People talk about him being sentimental. Yeah, and there's sentimentality. They talk about Capricorn. But the beginning and the ending of Meet John Doe are very desperate indeed. Tomorrow on the book club, I am going to celebrate Poland, the newly reconstituted Poland of 1919, and Marshal Józef Pilsudski, one of my heroes. The book is Norman Davis's history of that war of 1919 to 1920, and it is called White Eagle, Red Star. So that's the show for tonight. I'm sorry it went a little over, but I got caught up in my enthusiasm for the movie today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, and greatly appreciate it at all times, but especially now, because my situation is about to become, let's say, fluid shortly. You can send donations to my PayPal account, which is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send money to me directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, managed to find a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.